Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome to another exciting edition of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Unfortunately, Timothy Green Beckley will not be with us tonight. He's feeling a little bit under the weather, so Tim, if you're listening, we hope that you feel well soon. But we have got just a fantastic show tonight, and I'm really excited that I could get these two gentlemen lined up for tonight's show. And it's unfortunate because I know that Tim Beckley enjoys these types of programs, but we're just going to get right into it, because tonight we're going to be talking about lost civilizations, ancient structures, giants, Edgar Cayce, and anything else that comes our way and that we're interested in. And I know that our two guests are like me. We're interested in all kinds of different things along this genre. So I'll just get right to it and introduce him. First off, we have Jim Vieira. Now, Jim is an author, explorer, historical detective, and host of the History Channel show Search for the Lost Giants, and Roanoke, Search for the Lost Colony, and Return to Roanoke, Search for the Seven. He hosted those shows with his brother, by the way. And Jim has appeared on Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates and Legends of the Lost with Megan Foss. I just happened to catch that episode. It was running this morning, in fact. Now, Jim has investigated worldwide ancient stone sites, studied global indigenous oral traditions, religious documents, and readings of the great mystics and the literature of secret societies to form an alternative theory regarding the origins of civilization, a theory almost in perfect alignment with the readings of the famed sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce. His book, Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds, and the Smithsonian Files, was released in 2015 and was co-written by Hugh Newman. Now, also making a return visit, and happy that Dr. Little could be with us, Dr. Greg Little. Now, Dr. Little has master's in psychology and a doctorate in counseling and educational psychology from Memphis State University. He is nationally certified psychologist specializing in criminal treatment and is the author or co-author of over 60 books and has been featured in 14 documentaries on various cable networks about UFOs, Atlantis, the Bermuda Triangle, and archaeology. Now, Dr. Little has been writing about UFOs and other paranormal topics in the early 1980s. Now, since 1982, he's been active in writing about Native American mounds and spiritual practices, and spent over 10 years investigating underwater sites in the Bahamas and ancient sites in Central America. He is the author of the authoritative Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American Indian Mounds and Earthworks, and Path of Souls, which reveals the meaning of mysterious symbols found on ancient mound culture artifacts and how a death ritual that set souls to the stars was performed. Now, Dr. Little writes that in September of this year, he'll have a new book published and co-authored with Andrew Collins concerning the earliest habitations of the Americas. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Tim.
Thank you. And I hope Tim Beckley gets better real soon.
Oh, I hope. Yeah,
he's been around a long, long time.
and if he has it his way, he'll outlive us all. So,
and I am wondering why Jim Vieira is on this show on Valentine's Day. Jim should be out partying. I know his background and what he does. He should be out there. And I'm married. I've been married almost 40 years, so that's why I'm on a radio show. But I want to know why Jim Vieira is not out somewhere partying.
Thanks, Greg. I live amongst existence here. I got Linus the cat, and it's funny. I was married for like 15 years, and I still very fond of my ex Kimmy. I love her very much. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe one day. I figured I had to get my act together before I could get in a real relationship. So keep going to therapy, I guess.
Jim, just so you know, I also have a cat named Linus and his sister named Lucy. So
awesome. Nice.
Well, let's start with you, Jim. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, how you got interested, first of all, in unusual archaeology, which then led to your interest in giants?
Yes. My father, Ed Vieira, was a really nice guy. He was a World War II vet. He fought in Berlin in the Army. He was always interested in history and had a stack of National Geographic at the house, Hiram Bingham finding Machu Picchu. And I just would look at these kind of lost civilizations and cities, and they just always rang like there was a story there to be uncovered. And Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of just grabbed the hold of me in the 70s. But frankly, I just started to like autonomically in my late teens read massive amounts of information about like spiritual matters, the Upanishads, Lao Tse, Alan Watts, the non-dualists, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, Blavatsky, on and on and on. And I just had this abiding interest in the metaphysical, the nature of the soul, ask these questions about like, what's going on in the universe and time and space, where did it come from, what's the purpose of it? And a lot of my focus was spent there. And then ironically, or probably synchronistically, I ran into Greg Little's work, and oddly enough, and he got me interested. His work got me interested in ancient mysteries. Mm-hmm. His talk about the mound builders, his talk about Cayce, and his, it just all rang true to me. And it just, a light went on, and I'm kind of not obsessive, but I am a driven researcher who has 50 tabs open in his computer. I'm reading 7 books at once. I'm always downloading a massive amount of information. And by virtue of just studying I'm in Massachusetts, mm-hmm. So these mysteries in the woods, these stone mysteries in New England, finding all these chambers and what I would imagine be like Native American symbols, like stone turtles and serpents. I read through the town and county histories in the area I live in Western Massachusetts to figure out if there were accounts of pre-existing monuments, stone monuments when the colonists showed up, which indeed there are. But I started to just find these strange giant skeleton accounts, just littering the straightforward, matter-of-fact town and county history descriptions by noted historians, amateur archaeologists, professional archaeologists. And it just overwhelmed me how many of these accounts there are that we'll talk about, I'm sure. And then I found that other researchers like Hugh Newman, Greg, Ross Hamilton have unearthed, probably to this point, there's like 1,500 accounts of 7-foot and taller skeletons. Many of them are just soberly written about measurement of an anatomic anomaly, anatomic measurement. So it just grabbed my attention. And I will say I'll give credit to Greg for because I did the show and I caught a lot of heat. I did a TEDx talk, just kind of like, hey, this is interesting. Don't you guys think this is cool? And I realized pretty quickly that science is pretty ruthless, and there's a lot of ingrained dogmatic ways of thinking in science, and it's almost become like an atheistic cult where there's no acceptance of the metaphysical or the spiritual. So I really got, I'm not anti-science at all. It's just I believe in a blend of science and spirituality, and I think Greg brings that to his research as well. So that's why I admire him.
Go ahead, Greg.
So I've just been blamed. That's how I see it. As a criminal psychologist, I just got blamed. I appreciate all that, Jim. I will say this about one comment about what you said. I have come to the conclusion. I've written this on not too long ago, and have written more about it, and have had interactions with some archaeologists on it, including one you are very well aware of. And I have come to the conclusion that archaeology essentially functions identically to a cult. CULT, a cult. It's all of the, if you look up the definition of a cult and you look up all of the things that define a cult, all the little qualifications and activities and behaviors, archaeology functions like a cult. If you're on the outside, they don't want you to come to the inside. If you disagree with them at all, they try to destroy you. Anybody within their cult who says, you know, something we believe in might be wrong, they get destroyed. And they also, most of what they do is based on a belief system that they've built up, based on the smallest bit or paucity of evidence. And I'm just convinced that archaeology functions as a cult. It makes them angry to hear that. And of course, they shoot back and say, oh, you people are in a cult. But it's not really a science. It uses some scientific methods, but that doesn't make them a science. They functioned in a way where it looks like they're not looking for the truth. What their function is to maintain their belief system. That is what it looks like. And they'll go to any lengths to maintain that belief system. They will destroy people like you. In part, you've asked me before about shows, and I don't really go on TV anymore. I've added them up. I think it's 17 documentaries I was on, and the first ones I was on were very short appearances, but they always twisted what I said. They never presented what I really said. And I've just concluded the whole thing is I'm disgusted with it. I'm absolutely disgusted with archaeology. That's my bottom line.
Can I just address that for a sec, Tim?
Sure, go for it.
That's exactly what I've been thinking. I felt like, maybe that's too strong a word, but it isn't. And it's not like to denigrate anybody's way of thinking or any person individually. I think, I know Greg, all he does is, share positive stories and try to be kind to people and help people. It's not about like, you're right, we're right, you're wrong. It's just the function or the assemblage of science and how it works now is absolutely like a cult. There is no question about it. It's cultish thinking. And I know a lot of professionals. I work with professionals. I've done digs with professionals. I am friends with them. The thing they are more afraid of than like giants in Atlantis is like, spiritual self-reflection and ayahuasca ceremonies, that they just, I'm like, all the greatest spiritual masters throughout history, they're all given the same message. You can see it in the premise is like lightning hit ammonia and life was created, instead of, you can see it everywhere. You don't have to be Christian or Mormon. It's just like there is a holographic reality to the universe. There's no question about it. And you feel it viscerally. And I sit with like wisdom keepers and shamans. I do long ceremonies. I do a lot of, soul searching. And one thing I could tell you, absolutely, there's a universal creator, if you will, that we are a part of. We are not individual bodies. The soul is immortal, just like Plato and everybody else said. And to go back to the cult point, there was a neurosurgeon a couple of years ago, I believe from Harvard, who had a near-death experience. He came back, he was like sharing this, and he identified the same traits that he experienced with these other people who went to the other side temporarily. And he was like mocked and derided. It's not like, well, this guy's a known professional with a lot of credibility. Let's hear what he has to say. These are interesting topics that should be discussed, with your children and your wives and your friends. Like, hey, what's the nature of the soul? Like all the religions and spiritual teachers are talking about something else. And we are a whacked out materialistic cult that's destroying our planet, where we live. Should we not reflect on these things? And I completely agree. There's no acceptance of that. There's just mockery. It's like, what's this, 8th grade?
I listened to something the other night, and it was on a radio show I was on. It was like the 15 minutes before I got on, and they had a physicist, actually an astronomer who was also a physicist, who was discussing astrology. Now, I'm not going to say I believe in astrology. I'm not going to say I disbelieve. That is irrelevant. The point was the man said that it was dangerous. And the person interviewing him said, why is it dangerous? And he said, well, somebody might decide instead of getting medical treatment that they would follow their horoscope. And he said, so it could be really dangerous, and we need to stomp this out. We have to get rid of astrology because it's misleading people and it's dangerous. I've heard the same thing said about virtually every religion. Depending where you go, you'll hear it about every religion and all the spiritual belief systems that exist. And what I say and what I've written many times, whatever gives people solace, whatever makes people better people, I think is good. And I don't care if astrology is real or not. A lot of people are amused by it. Some people like it. Some people are very interested in it. And that's fine. So what? Just like, why do archaeologists have to deny even the 7-foot skeletons that the Smithsonian pulled out and wrote about themselves? Why do they deny that? They deny that. There are skeptics, I know Jim knows who some of them are, that say virtually every large skeleton, even those recovered from mounds that were burials of humans, if there was a large skeleton in there, it must have been a mastodon bone. And it's simply absurd. It's absurd. And to some extent, all that is why I don't see much reason to try to engage with those professionals. There are a few that I am friends with. They seldom want me to mention their names. In fact, there is a mainstream archaeologist who is quite well known, who believes in Atlantis, who believes that the Bahamas actually probably has the remnants of Atlantis in it. And he has said, you can never, ever attach my name to any of that because I'll never get a grant again. I'll never be able to publish research again. And he's a mainstream person. It's just disgusting. It truly is.
Well, what a shame, though, that somebody has to fear their potential future funding and not be able to look into things that are of interest to him and could have excellent potential.
Yeah, it's part of it kind of to have the foil makes it an interesting game, though. I think when you look at it's funny, like skeptics will use it in reverse, like look at all the pseudoscience that's poisoning everybody's mind. But I think the percentage of the population who believe in Atlantis is like 54% now, like higher than ever before. I just read some poll, and belief in extraterrestrials is much larger than it's ever been. And it's people are tapping into Jung's collective unconsciousness. These things ring true. They're just like, I don't, the general themes I believe, that Greg and I will speak about, that like Cayce spoke about and Steiner and secret societies, I think they're generally true. We may not get every date right and every fact correct, but I think these general themes are true. And frankly, I'll give like Andrew Collins, Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, Greg, my buddy Hugh Newman, Brian Forrester, a lot of alternative researchers have been pointing to these realities of like the Younger Dryas impact events, like this cataclysmic event that happened 13,000 years ago, the writings of Plato. And I know Hancock and Schoch have been kind of shy about mentioning Atlantis for a long time, rather pointing to this advanced civilization, knowing the backlash and mockery they would get. But all these researchers have been pointing, and now they're just being verified with the Younger Dryas impact event, the destruction of the Clovis Barrier, the idea that humans only entered the Americas in 13,000 years ago. On and on and on, the finds of new Denisovans and hobbits in Indonesia. These ideas that were once heretical have been turned over and proven by science. But there's no apology letter. It's just like, what's the next entrenched thing we can fight everybody on, And, I think along with what Greg was saying, that the idea of giants is the same as that. It's just like the Clovis Barrier is a very good analogy because the scientists like Maurice Collins from Texas and Jim Adavazio from Meadowcroft Shelter, they were on a PBS special with Dennis Stanford a couple of years ago about human origins. And they said they came up with pre-Clovis dates, and they were ridiculed by other professionals. They were accused of planting evidence of using contaminated samples. And they were just disgusted on camera on this PBS special. And it was like, whoa, you know? And just like the Younger Dryas impact event or this idea of giants, the professionals have dug their heels in for 100 years and mocked and denigrated the idea of it existing, although oral traditions and early explorers support the idea too, along with all the records. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's worthy of further investigation. But if you had me hooked up to a lie detector test, man, giants are real, Atlantis existed, I'm telling you, on and on and on, and I don't give a rat's ass.
and if it let me play, we've only got a minute till the break, I know, but I can play a strange devil's advocate here. Let's pretend Atlantis didn't exist. So what? What is the harm in people being interested in history and being interested in the past and digging into it? What's the harm in believing it? There isn't any. It makes life interesting. It doesn't make you evil or bad if it's not real. Now, personally, I think there was something. Call it Atlantis for lack of a better term. But even if it didn't exist, why try to destroy people who are out doing what they should be doing, looking for evidence? Why do they do that? Because it's a cult. That's why.
It's a cult, yes.
That is what a cult.
Well, and considering also, I mean, you know, people who have gone out looking for Atlantis have found other things that have turned out to, be very significant historically.
Many of the most important discoveries in archaeology are made by other people that aren't archaeologists, and then the discoveries are usually appropriated by archaeology, and they don't give any credit to the people that actually found it.
All right. Well, we're off to a good start on exploring the bizarre. So, unfortunately, we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. But when we come back, we will continue this absolutely excellent conversation. So stay tuned for more.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Our guests tonight are Jim Vieira and Dr. Craig Little. And so, Jim, I was going to wait a little bit later into the program, but since you brought this up in our first segment, I'm going to have to ask you to talk a little bit about your TED Talk. First of all, I want to know how they allowed you to even give it in the first place before the shit hit the fan, so to speak.
Yeah, I just actually there was a woman in Shelburne Falls where I live and asked me. I had done some talks about stone mysteries in New England at Greenfield Community College, and it was funny. Right on the heels of that, I talked about some controversial ideas, and they had Ken Feder, the uber skeptic, show up because. Rich Little, the geologist at Greenfield Community College, I could see how he's a nice guy, but how rattled he was by what I was saying. He's telling these people all these whacked out lies. We got to set the record straight. So they had Feder come in a couple months later. But anyways, this woman Stacy invited me because she knew people in the area liked my talks and my stone mysteries investigations. So I gave it, and I basically also I talked about I'm a stonemason. I explore the woods, kind of identifying these Native American stone mysteries, and by virtue of that, I started to find the oddest accounts of giant skeletons noted, by sober academics and historians, and all around the country in an era of inefficient communication. Even the Smithsonian's anthology reports, even reports from the Carnegie, on and on and on. And
Mhm.
I just laid out this matter-of-fact case that there was these anatomic anomalies like double rows of teeth or jawbones over the face that were buried obscurely in these voluminous texts. They weren't like front page newspaper stuff. And I said, I just find it fascinating. I didn't draw any conclusions. I didn't say the Cyclops is going to eat your animals or something. It's just like, it's just a really fascinating thing. And I shared it. And at the end, I got a little pissed because I had just read the New Yorker article by Jane Mayer about the Koch brothers giving money to the Smithsonian and obfuscating the truth about climate change. So I went on this little rant about the Smithsonian taking money from the Koch brothers and them installing these self-serving permanent installations at the Human Hall of Origins in DC. But anyways, and then it went nuts. It was the #1 watched TEDx talk in the world.
Mhm.
And then they took it down, and there was an archaeologist who gave all these fake points debunking my talk, calling it pseudoscientific. And it was just like, you can't carbon date stone, which of course I know. I was talking about a carbon dated evidence from a stone chamber that was tested at Geochron Labs. There was like some charcoal was tested. Like maybe I had the wording wrong or something like that. Then there was just all these like half truths and half-assed, like taking a run at me and trying to denigrate me and basically not addressing the evidence and all. And I'm like, this is so odd. I'm just like sharing this matter of fact information. I'm not drawing any conclusion, and I'm getting like ripped apart here. And like I was really naive too. I'm kind of like a upbeat guy. It's like volunteer to coach and help people and do nice things. And I went out there in the world of social media or whatever, and I just took a lot of heat. And I understand I look and I sound like a guy who plays a bet with maybe, but I've done my homework. And I've spent years. I spent over 15 years. I can't tell you how many academic papers and archaeological texts and professionals I've interviewed, and I've done my homework, and I understand both sides of the street as far as ancient mystery is concerned, because I don't want to be misinformed, and I've changed my opinions and everything like that. So the logic, to your point, it was more like this is pseudoscientific, this is crazy. Let's remove this video. So my video was taken down. And it gave me some street cred, and I ended up getting a show out of it. So it had a happy ending.
Well, and you haven't been the only one who has given TED Talks that have found themselves then on the brunt of censorship, basically.
Graham Hancock is a perfect example. And Graham, I know Graham personally. I've met him. Brilliant guy. And prophetic, once again, like a lot of the other guys who are dialed in to the collective unconscious, who are alternative researchers. Like Hancock, he does ayahuasca ceremonies. He's into spiritual pursuits. He's into self-inquiry, self-reflection. And he has been very prophetic about a lot of these things, back from Fingerprints of the Gods. And now it's all unwinding and being proven. Like they even found a second impact crater in Greenland. And I bet because it still exists, it's not too old. I bet you this is part of the cataclysm that Plato and Cayce talked about from about 12,800 years ago, the final sinking of Atlantis, which Cayce and Plato said were situated in the Atlantic all the way to the Bahamas, a series of island chains that were broken up. Not to get tangential, but, there is an obvious truth if you look at these things with an objective mind that many people are seeing. And I will say that archaeology is treated as an incontrovertible truth, like the science that makes our cell phone work. It isn't. It's just a series of educated guesses. And it was cooked up in the late 1800s, archaeology, anthropology, and geology for the most part, by a bunch of like racist, lunatics who just denigrated Native American beliefs. We threw out 10,000 years of evidence and oral traditions, and especially in our country. So we basically burned the Library of Alexandria by denigrating oral tradition in our own country, and we're going in blind with all these weird manifest destiny ideas. Not to go on a rant or get on a soapbox, but it's really true. Like the destruction and the dismissal of native wisdom, and those people, so many tribal people were dialed in to the metaphysical. They understood what the hell was going on in time and space and the larger, collective unconscious and interconnected beingness of all. And our culture is like running off the rails. There's like 6 people own half the world's wealth, and we're destroying our planet. And our science is allowing us to be a materialistic cult because they laugh at and they mock the spiritual.
Well, now you brought up a good point, though, and this is something that both of you can answer with your own perspective on this. But you mentioned that some of the the early historians and archaeologists had a racist bent. But now you've got a lot of these, skeptics and debunkers about the whole, say like the giant bones and giant mythology, saying that, oh, well, you're being racist by suggesting this stuff, by saying that, the Native Americans either weren't the first here, the giants were here, or it's just like they're trying to do a little bit of role reversal on some of these alternative theories that you're suggesting.
That's good. I'll let Greg address that because I just ran my mouth for a while, but then I'd like to jump in and give my 2 cents.
All right.
Well, I liked what you said. I'll say this about it. I wrote a bit in that book, Path of Souls, and I've really addressed that very issue in this new book that comes out in September. It sounds like a long way away, but it comes out in September. It's called Denisovan Origins. That's the new title of it anyway. However, what the skeptics are claiming, you have to look at what they're saying. I've said for years that Native Americans are genetically very diverse, and it's a very rich culture. It's always been a melting pot. They had a number of different genetic lineages. They had some people, just like all societies do, who were the elite members of their society. All societies have elite members, and elite members generally have certain commonalities among them. However, the skeptics say that, if you talk about all that, it's racist. No, all the Native Americans were all the same size. If you read what the skeptics write, they'll tell you over and over. Almost all of them were 5'6" to 5'8". They were all relatively short. They all came over from the same place at the same time. That was the 70-year belief of the Clovis first theory. So they're actually putting them down, saying they were a small, short people, all of whom came from the same place at the same time. Nothing special here. Don't look for anything different. Don't look for a mixture from, say, maybe Australia or Melanesia or Micronesia. Don't look for a mixture from maybe the Altai Mountains. Don't look for something like maybe the Denisovans. Because that's racist. No, they were all exactly the same, nothing special about them. They only made mounds, and they were all the same size. That is basically what they say. If you actually do an evaluation of skeptics, and I have yet to publish this, I have done all the research. There's actually lists of skeptics. There's on Wikipedia. You can get all the main skeptics. They show their race. They show their background. Their sex, and in most cases, they show their sexual orientation because most of them are very open about it. So almost all skeptics, it's in the high 90%, are white male, older white males. Now, why would older white males take that position? That would be my question. They all hang together, and anybody that's saying your story about Native Americans is wrong, I have written and said for decades that the Native American culture was far deeper and richer than what anybody would ever admit to. Not just that, their heritage, their genetic heritage is far deeper and richer than anyone would admit to. In fact, most Native Americans would agree with that. Anybody that came to the Americas before the first whites came in, or the first European explorers, we call them explorers, but they really weren't. Anybody that was here was Native American. That's why I'll say all the time, all the mounds were built by the ancestors of the Native Americans that were here when the first whites came in. And that's what they want you to say. But they want you to then say that they all came over from Asia across Beringia, which is the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, which was above water during the last ice age. That's what they want you to say. But actually, I see what they're doing is something very subtle. They're actually saying the Native Americans are nothing special. And I think that is more racist.
Yeah, it was Greg's encyclopedia. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
yeah, it was like Greg's encyclopedia of Native American earthworks, his mound builder books, and talks that I watched that got me interested. I'm like, whoa, the geometric forms, the predicting of eclipses, understanding the metonic cycle at like the Newark earthworks in Ohio, the incredible nature of native civilizations was so overwhelming that I'm like, holy hell, I didn't learn a scrap of this, literally. It was like, it started with Columbus, and then it was like tariffs and wars, and I didn't know anything about native civilization. I was an avid reader and a historian when I was younger, so I was shocked and enthralled with the whole subject, and Greg's whole orientation was to like try, to just show what a glorious civilization, so many civilizations existed in the Americas before the colonists showed up. There are, there's undercurrents here. Like, I've done shows on Roanoke, and I know that there's a lot of white Americans who are interested in like the Vikings and things like that. And we don't get taught about Native Americans in school, so they're not really interesting. So it's just like, did a lost race build the mounds of America? And there's actually some like white supremacist elements that are at the fringes of ancient mysteries that are like, they have this weird story of like white supremacy that, I know all the guys I work with and stuff aren't into. I don't want to dent it. I'm not going to get in the soapbox and pretend I'm the greatest guy ever. I'm just going to say that, my orientation is to like accept all people for what they are. Ancient America really appears to be a melting pot of people. And I never want to take anything away from indigenous people. Like, I'll go down to Pumapunku and I'll say, this is beyond the, to build that site beyond the capabilities or the tools of the time from like 200 AD. So it's not like bad mouthing the Amira people. It's just saying it almost seems like these structures we have before them. And in Egypt is the same thing. It's like the Egyptians became what they became through an influx, I believe, and maybe Cayce would say, of people from other lands mixed with the indigenous peoples. This isn't like, like the Spanish used it like, the Veracoches were the bearded white wisdom keepers who showed up to these uncivilized people. That was like a Spanish Christian twist on it, I think. The point being that a lot of alternative researchers have nothing but respect for indigenous people all around the world. And I've sat with indigenous people for long periods of time and listened to the stories, and they're all saying the same strange and specific thing about the past. There's something to be had in the understanding of oral tradition. And that, to me, is where the cultish aspect of academia comes in. There's like no respect. It used to be the racism was like cranial measuring and all this stuff, pre-eugenic stuff in the late 1800s. And now there's a new kind of weird, it's like a liberal racism or something where like a lot of academia is atheistic, liberal oriented teachings and people. And I'm kind of, like I said, I'm like a Kenny Democrat. I have some conservative tendencies or whatever, but viewing academia now, they think they're doing the right thing, and I believe in social and economic justice, but there is a huge bias and a cultish way of thinking when it comes to ancient mysteries. It's like there's a couple skinheads over here who are saying that like Native Americans didn't do this or that, and we're going to pretend that that's what all these researchers are talking about, and we're not going to be objective. We're going to like call everybody a racist who's like an ancient mysteries researcher. And I know, like, Andrew Collins, of all people, has been called that by like that idiot Jason Colavito. And there's these like self-loathing skeptics who just like live off a diet of like hate and denigration. It's just like, do you not make enough dopamine? Don't you get a better hobby? You know what I mean? Sorry, this is something, because there's a lot of cool and thoughtful people who really like, they care about humanity. They want to like share things. They want a better world, and they're like undercut by an academic cult and by skeptics. It's just not cool in my estimation.
One of the things that I'll add to that is that until somewhere around the late 1980s and the 2000s really is when it started, archaeologists pretty much ignored the alternative community. And it's only when the alternative community that Jim was talking about a minute ago started telling people how incredible some of these archaeological sites are, not just in America, but also in South America and around the world. That is when archaeologists started taking notice and attacking. It's like they circled the wagons. And to some extent, it is it's pure jealousy. It's resentment that they believe that people are making a fortune off of a field that they own. It's their playing field. No one else should be in it. And you have all these alternative writers coming in, making a fortune out of it. And I'm sure Jim can tell you, you do not make a fortune out of this field. It doesn't happen. You don't make a living out of this field.
No.
So it's really a labor of love because people believe in it. I don't know of anybody. I know of some archaeologists that are pretty racist. I don't know of anybody in this field except perhaps one writer who I'll just keep I won't mention, but that's the only person who I would even say might be racist. But I don't know anybody else that's shown anything that I would call racism. In fact, they're all fascinated. And if anything, most of us, it's like Jim has almost told you that he's more impressed with these other indigenous cultures than with himself. It's like, I can learn a great deal from these other cultures. That isn't racism. That's the exact opposite of it. It's really looking at other cultures like they have a great deal to give you if you're willing to study them. So it's not racism. What archaeologists are telling us to do is, no, stay away from this. There's nothing here to see. There's nothing to do. We will tell you what we need to know. That's what they're telling us. And I resent it. And I don't really confront them anymore. I don't really mention any of them by name. I just write what I write, and we'll give shows like this. That's about it.
You know, I think one of the things that has always dismayed me about the whole, field of archaeology is the dismissal of say, like the indigenous peoples' lore, legends, mythologies, stories, things like that, concentrating solely on what they dig up and ignoring, the hand-me-down, word-for-word stories from thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think Greg
I will say,
go on, Greg.
I will say one more thing. I know you're moving up to another break. Am I right about that?
Yeah, about 4 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in all the years that I have been practicing in the field of psychology, I've known many, many psychologists and many, many academics. I have what would be called unusual interests in the field, which include UFOs, abduction. I have an interest in abduction experiences. I have an interest in apparitional phenomena and people that claim to have seen angels and all that kind of stuff. I've always had an interest in it. I have an interest in Edgar Cayce. And I have, of course, this interest in archaeology. So in all the years, I've talked to many, many psychologists and many, many academics who are professionals in the field of psychology. And they've said, oh, you're interested in that. And I might say, yeah. And then I'd talk a bit. Not one time has anybody ever said, well, you shouldn't believe that. You shouldn't be in that. Or that's bad. What they've done is they've said, why do you think that? And often they'll say, well, I'll think about that. They've never attacked. It's only in this field of archaeology that I've ever experienced that. Archaeologists have textbooks out that say all UFOs are nonsense. They have textbooks out that say Edgar Cayce was a charlatan. How could they know that? How can they say that? They don't know it. It's all an opinion, and it's based upon something deeper. It's based upon a deep belief system.
No, that's a great point. I know we've spent this hour. I think, like when I write books, my introduction is always oriented like this first hour. It doesn't really get put in context, like how academia works, why these things aren't widely accepted by academics, although they're widely accepted, these topics by the public, the general public. I think it's really, we'll get into the nuts and bolts and more evidence-based stuff in hour 2, I'm sure, not to be the fake co-host here, but
go for it.
but I think it's really important to lay it out. And I always talk in these terms with my brother and with my friends and co-author Hugh Newman, like to put it in context for people. This is what's going on here. It's not like we're right, they're wrong. It's just, these are the dynamics at work, and there is a bizarre entrenched orientation in archaeology and anthropology. It's I will say too, and geology is a little more flexible, but a lot of the same. And it's kind of a shame because it's not like, oh, these are bad people and I want to demonize anyone. It's just like when I go to the doctor and I have a compound fracture, I'm not going to take homeopathy. I'm glad I'm there, right? But if I need to really heal myself, I got to self-reflect, go to a therapist, eat a certain way, exercise, things the doctor isn't going to really tell me because it's an allopathic kind of materialistic orientation that is being, taught and is entrenched with interests and dogma and stuff. And just like academia. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. So it's not to denigrate anyone or any, situation, but to highlight what's going on here and why I think people should be open to these ideas.
All right, excellent. Well, okay, we need to go to our top of the hour break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jim Vieira and Dr. Greg Little on exploring the bizarre, so stay tuned.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. Our guests tonight, Jim Vieira and Dr. Greg Little, and we are talking about giants, Edgar Cayce, alternative archaeology, all kinds of fun stuff. And if anybody out there has any questions for our guests, then please text us. You can call in all kinds of different ways. Go to the chat room. We love to hear from you. We love to hear your questions. All right, gentlemen. So let's get into the subject of New World giants. Now, I live in Indiana, and as you well know, we have a rich history of mounds and earthworks, as well as especially 19th century discovery of giant bones in this state. In fact, there's a location just a few miles down the road from where I live that there is a newspaper article talking about giant bones discovered in this mound, which unfortunately has long been plowed under, as are a lot of the smaller sites throughout the state. We still have the Anderson mounds, and then the Evansville, Indiana mounds, which have become state parks. But a lot of the critics of the whole North America giant bones, they love to pick on the newspaper and science journal articles that were written at the time of these discoveries, saying that they were local hoaxes, that they were reprint after reprint from other newspapers across the country. Now, I've had the opportunity to do research myself, going to local libraries, things like that, looking up some of these older newspaper accounts. Sometimes you can tell that, this is, probably an editor or reporter having fun. And there are, reprints from across the country, but there are also a lot of local accounts that happened within, a few days after the article was written about these discoveries. So, and I think that a lot of people in this country are surprised to learn that these kinds of finds, had been made in the past. They may be familiar with, say, like biblical accounts of giants and things like that, but they have no idea that these types of bones were being discovered in North America. So whoever wants to jump on this first, go for it.
Jim?
Sure, I will. And then Greg can add his expertise to it. Absolutely. I found, I've tracked down so many stories. I read on Facebook. I wrote Your Daily Giant for 430 days straight, where I investigated and reported on individual accounts for that length of time. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I dug into the research. It forced me to contact family members, to talk to professionals, to dig into records. And what I found was the vast majority of these accounts aren't headline splashing clickbait of the time. They're rather obscurely buried, documented by sober academics or historians, sometimes farmers and lay people. But so many of the accounts are, 8-foot, 2-inch skeleton was unearthed. The jawbone was so massive it could fit over the largest man in town with room to spare. And across the entire country, these same reports, the town is abuzz, the skull is at the county clerk's office, that. And you reach out and you're like, oh, my grandfather dug that up, like in a show in Missouri, 8-foot skeleton. We found the spot it was dug up. And he's like, oh, if he was saying it, you take that to the bank. And students, along with a professor from the University of Missouri, they measured it. They shipped it to the Smithsonian in 1933. And I'm not going to put it all in the Smithsonian as some vast conspiracy, and they have giant bones in the 20th level of their dungeon or whatever. I'm just going to say that there is no question that these are just the measurement of a stationary object in an era of inefficient communication. A lot of these are not hoaxes, although there are some, of course. There are some regression formula problems. There's mismeasurement. There's faulty regression formulas that we used. But a lot of them are just like, if it's a 29-inch femur bone with Native American artifacts in context, you can be pretty certain that it's a 29-inch femur bone. It's absolutely enormous, over 8-foot tall person. And the early explorers, everyone you can name, from Magellan, DeSoto, Coronado, John Smith, they all encountered enormous giant chiefs like Tuscaloosa in Alabama, and his father. It's not like, oh, the Spanish were 5'2" and the natives were 5'9". It was like they were talking about absolutely enormous native rulers, and the whole story taken together. It's not just one or two sources. It's religious documents, oral traditions, the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, great mystics. They all talk about giants being a reality. And the Bible has like 23 different accounts of giants, the sons of Anak, the Anunnaki. It's just amazing. The entire globe is littered with like giant hands and feet with 6 fingers and toes, and rock art and petroglyphs and oral traditions, and on isolated Pacific islands. The whole thing is it's so astonishing how giants are woven into the literal landscape everywhere you go all around this globe. And ancient America has a mysterious story to tell that should be welcomed. You want to get people in to have an interest. Hey, what was going on? These native civilizations were astounding. Let's look at them. And instead, you see the entrenched orientation of dismissing all of them with an amalgam of like half-assed debunking theories like, oh, the mastodon bones. No, they're not. maybe one or two, but we're talking about a Native American grave that has Native American artifacts in it with the specific anatomical measurements. So I'm not saying I have the time machine, but I'm saying nobody has the time machine. And to denigrate oral traditions and ignore all these accounts is bad science.
Right, Dr. Little?
You've got to add into that. You and Hugh, Andrew and I, and several other people, Ross Hamilton's another one. There's loads of people I should mention, but we don't have time to mention them all. But there has been a lot of research where people like us have gone through the actual scientific studies, the scientific articles published by the people that did the excavations. They were doctoral level archaeologists at the University of Kentucky, from the Carnegie Institution, from the University of Alabama. Many archaeologists dug into mounds doing excavations before 1990. That's a key date in all of this. And they reported good measurements. They knew how to measure skeletal remains. They found many skeletons that were between 7 and 8 feet tall. And they found a lot more that were, say, 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", and so on. But they found many that were at least 7 feet tall to 8 feet tall. Statistically, it is disproportionate. There have been, I ran several statistical measures on it based strictly on what the Smithsonian found, and statistically, it's not a coincidence. It's not something you'd find by chance. There was a group in ancient America of people. I don't talk about people above 8 feet tall. There probably were some, but it's very clear there was a very large group of people, no pun intended, that were here at the time of the mound builders, sometime maybe 3,000-4,000 years ago, who were 7 to 8 feet tall, and they were important. They were the elite, and we know that because they were not cremated. They were put in elaborate tombs and elaborate burials. So they were very important to the society. There's no doubt about it. Now, the skeptics don't ever even talk about them. It's in all of the scientific literature, but the skeptics will not even acknowledge them. They say, well, show me the bones. Jim knows very well what happened to them. The Smithsonian, when I contacted the Smithsonian, this was in 2015. 2015. I was told that they had less than 300 Native American, and this includes South and Central America, Native American skeletal remains, less than 300. And all of the ones that they had were from South and Central America, and the only reason that they had those is they couldn't find anyone to give them to. They could not get rid of them. They're not allowed to get rid of them. They had to give them to some native tribe, some official tribe that would take them. And then the native tribes either rebury them or they cremate them. I know they have done a lot of cremations on them. So the evidence of all these skeletons is gone. And that's very convenient for the skeptics to say, well, show me a skeleton. Well, there are some photos of them, and there certainly are loads and loads of archaeological reports from major American universities where they were found. That is very clear. A lot of the newspaper articles that Jim mentioned, I believe he started this out by saying there were about at least 1,500 of them now. And I'm sure that is correct, if not more than that. Some of those newspaper articles were based upon the archaeological finds. And all I did with a skeptic was he said, oh, they're all nonsense. And I said, well, that means if we find just one that wasn't nonsense, then your statement that they're all nonsense is wrong. And we did. It was very easy to find newspaper articles that were reporting straight out of the archaeological reports. It is true that there were some that were exaggerations and probably some that were made up and some that were based on very elaborate hoaxes. Some of these people were very clever with what they did, but they weren't archaeologists and they weren't people out to do a hoax with Native Americans per se. They were trying to make money out of it one way or another. They were doing the hoaxes to swindle people out of money, in some cases land deals. But there is clear evidence that they were here. I know a lot more about North America. I know, too, South America has many tales one of the people who witnessed the extermination of the very tall people in extreme South America around Tierra del Fuego, wrote about it. I've got quotes in the book that's coming out in September about what this person wrote about it, watching the extermination of this very tall tribe of people, all of whom were supposedly well over 7 feet tall. And that person was Charles Darwin. Darwin is the person who wrote that and witnessed it. We know there were these pockets where there were a lot of very tall people, exceedingly tall. So there was something going on. And it truly is. It's a very interesting mystery. And I would take the position, what is the harm in looking into it? How does that hurt science? How does that hurt archaeology? And it doesn't. They just aren't doing it themselves, and they can't for whatever reason, or they're not.
Yeah, let me quickly add the Ona people that you talked about in Patagonia at the tip of South America. My buddy Micah Ewers has done a lot of research into giant mysteries, and he found a Frederick Cook article in the late 1800s when the Ona were being exterminated, and he met between 6.5 to 7.5 foot tall natives, and he has pictures, and we have them in our book. A 6'6" Ona woman, a 7'2" male, a 7'4" male, all photographed. And Cook talked about they had an incredible strength. Their voice was like in a vault. The almost people with almost different genetics than we have. Like a genetic mystery, but absolutely an anthropological curveball. This isn't like when I talk to skeptics, it's like, well, maybe there's the Adena people, they were fed better than the rest of the other people, or they were interbreeding in a royal class.
You don't get taller when you're fed better. You just get fat. I can attest to that.
I appreciate the desire to maybe try to figure it out, but it's never through the lens of maybe there was, ancient America and, evolution occurring, from Australopithecines to the Homo genus, the spread around the globe. And now you see that it's all in turmoil. That's another thing. Out of Africa is a mess. Human origins, it's is it multi-regionalism? Why is Homo erectus in the Republic of Georgia 2 million years ago? There's all these new questions, which is great, but a perceptual shift. Well, maybe there was a lost continent, or maybe there is genetic intervention in the creation of Homo sapiens. Answers a lot of questions that we're talking about here. And if you read all the accounts of the mystics, the secret societies, the oral traditions, you find a different story. These ancient texts hold a lot of wisdom that they're telling the same strange and specific story about the origins of humans, and it has a very supernatural aspect to it. And I shied away from that for a long time because I'm in over my head already. But intuitively, there is something to these stories, I believe, and at the very least, they're worthy of investigation.
Okay, well, you brought up a good point about the genetic mysteries. One of the consistent points that has been brought up with a lot of these early newspaper and science journal accounts is the observation that a lot of these giant skulls had double rows of teeth, and I know that Jim, that you have been taken to task a couple of times by some skeptics when you discuss this. But it's this was written about quite a bit. I mean, not every account of a giant skull, was observed to have this. But do you think that this is a
real phenomena?
Well, yeah. What I'm trying to think of is a hereditary trait. When you have family groups marrying in with each other, you carry this on, down the line.
Anomaly.
Thank you.
You're asking.
Yes.
Right. I mean, do you think this is that this actually, took place, that these observations were correct, or as somebody pointed out, I was reading today, was just a matter of they had ground their teeth down to such a point that it was just their molar, the roots of their molars showing through.
Yeah, I'll give my take on it, and then Greg can chime in. There's a noted skeptic that I'm friends with who made the point that it might be the parlance of the time. Like these finds were described like if you're double jointed, you're not really double jointed. Like when in the 1900s discussing like perfect teeth in the lower and upper jaw was to say a double row of teeth was a way to describe that, because most of the colonists had the teeth rotten out of their head, and the native skulls had perfect teeth. So that's the idea, And I'll say to that, I've done same thing in Europe. Hugh Newman and I have uncovered hundreds of accounts, and I haven't found any double rows of teeth accounts in Europe, but I've certainly found jawbones over the face, massive skeletons, the same thing you find in the Americas. So I am open to the idea, when it was first brought up, it was that this is a complete hoax. And I'm like, this isn't a hoax. This is reported, like in obscure journals and stuff. Something else is going on. And maybe some of these are described, maybe these are, what am I trying to say, are really the parlance of the time. I'm not against that idea. I'm open to whatever. But what it really does indicate are these real accounts and real observations of human skeletons, not mastodon bones and things like that. It could be hyperdontia, extra teeth. It could be double rows of teeth. I'm not entirely sure. I just know that it's not a hoax. That's where I fall down on it.
Jim, I think Jim is dead on with that. Some of it was the parlance of the time, where a double row of teeth meant you had an upper and lower row of teeth. But I think some of them did have what you're calling a double row of teeth. Some of them actually did have that. If they did, it has to be a genetic disorder. All of that comes from genetics anyway. Mm-hmm. But if I was Jim, what I would do is flip that back on the person that is attacking that. Oh, that these reports say a double row of teeth. Oh, that really means this. And if they're saying that part of the story is true, then why isn't the 7 foot tall true that's in the same newspaper article? If they're saying that it must be that, they must be referring to just regular teeth, well, then why is the other part not looked at? Why is the other part not true then? They're saying part of the article is true.
And yes, and that's the point I made. It's just like, actually, this is further verification that this is a real phenomenon that should be investigated. And 1877, 44th Smithsonian Ethnology Report, Augustus Mitchell in, I think, Amelia Island, Florida, unearthed an over 7 foot skeleton. And he said not only did it have 2 rows of teeth, it had a third set coming in too. That was in the Smithsonian's own ethnology reports. And Mitchell put the skull in front of him. He said it was absolutely the most giant skull, this is all in the records, he's ever seen. And it disintegrated after like a half an hour of exposure to the air. And when I did my TEDx talk, I mentioned that a lot of these bones were disintegrated or reported to have disintegrated at some point because whatever. And one of the arguments was that I made that up so I didn't have to explain where the bones were. And
it's in the reports.
It's in the report. My rebuttal
is report after report that the Smithsonian wrote that as soon as they exposed the bones to the air, they could actually see them start to turn to almost powdery dust.
Exactly.
When we come back, I know we got a break coming. When we come back from it, Jim, ask me about Amelia Island, because I talked to the officials there about the giant reports. That is one of the places where some of the early explorers went in, and they met exceedingly tall people. And the chiefs were all at least 7 feet tall. The women were almost as tall as the chiefs, and the rest of the tribe was exceedingly tall. And I've got to tell you what they officially say now and what they say in their museums there. It's very interesting. Of course, they deny it all. It's just totally denied. But you've actually got proof. What you just said, I mean, some of those double rows of teeth or even triple, there is evidence for them. Absolutely. Probably not all of those reports are true, but we already know newspaper reports aren't true. And I love the way they say, oh, those old newspaper reports aren't true. Well, how about modern newspaper reports? Everything we read today true? And the answer is no. It's just the way it is.
It's a way to denigrate the argument. And the reality is the majority of these accounts aren't newspaper accounts.
Right.
Yeah.
They're academic journals. They're scientific reports. Yep. That's what I'm getting at, and we're all talking about. So, and I know the break is here in a second. There are dozens of accounts where it's specifically stated a remarkable feature was double rows of teeth in both the upper and lower jaw. You have that at the Bates Mound with 8-foot skeletons in Ohio. You have it in Martha's Vineyard, Rockingham, Vermont.
All right, I'm gonna have to interrupt you here, Jim. We have to go to our break right now. When we come back, we'll let this conversation continue on exploring the bizarre. So stay tuned.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the final segment of Exploring the Bizarre, and we're having a great time tonight with Jim Vieira and Dr. Greg Little. So, gentlemen, I want to bring Edgar Cayce into all this, but I want to kind of get into that a little bit sideways, because I was wanting to ask, and of course this is just, opinions and speculations, but I know that, some researchers have put out the idea that that these giants could have been a subspecies, a cousin, to humanity, rather than being, Homo sapiens sapiens, maybe just, Homo sapiens, like maybe an archaic version of the species. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I could chime in first, I was going to mention that one of the biggest criticisms I know when I started this whole area of research was like, how could science ever miss a lost race? That's utterly absurd. You're a fool. Take a hike. Like there's no way that science is going to miss. They've been through all this evidence at it for so long, and the reality is not only were hobbits found in Indonesia in 2003 on the Isle of Flores, this human cousin that's about 3.5 foot tall, but Denisovans were found, I think, in 2010 at the Denisova Cave, and not only are they a lost race, they might have been giant. They might have been giant as well. Greg could talk about this. He wrote about it in his new book, but they found two massive teeth that are so large they thought they were the teeth of a cave bear until they sequenced them at the Max Planck Institute and found out they were human cousin that actually interbred with humans and Neanderthals, which was once another anthropological heresy that was supposed to be impossible. So basically, science is being shown that they were, profoundly wrong about this. And Denisovans could be the clue to this mystery, but at the very least, it's an astonishing turn of events here. And I'll throw it to Greg because he's Mr. Denisovan these days and get his take on it.
I'm not Mr. Denisovan. I'll tell you what I really believe about that is that the discovery of this Denisovan lineage of humans tells us that there's a lot more, probably even earlier. We still don't have the whole story. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was an artificial intelligence statistical study done, and they determined absolutely there has to be something missing here. There were other human species. I'm calling species. It's a different type of genetic human. They look like us, but they're different genetically.
I don't.
Well, yeah. We are the human family is huge, and it goes way back in time. We've probably primates have been banging around at least for 8 million years, maybe more. Edgar Cayce actually said that it was that the first sentient or human-like life was here around 10 million years ago. And when Cayce said that, it was believed that modern human beings and even primates only went back to less than 1 million years ago. So Cayce said it was 10 million years ago. So he was thought to be absurd even when he started. He also said that humans began, there were 5 separate types of humans, different races, he did call them races, that developed pretty much at the same time in different places. And we went through a series of root races, different types of humans. And all that was considered absurd too. But I think the bottom line today is we really don't know. And we can point to the Denisovans as being important, and I think they are. There is Denisovan DNA and Neanderthal DNA in both North American Native Americans and in South America, in the natives there. There is a lot of Denisovan and Neanderthal DNA found in the indigenous people that live in New Zealand and Australia. And that is a clue. There are people in South America that have human DNA identical to Australian Aborigines. It's the only place they could have come from. And all of that, it's in a very primitive tribe in Amazonia in Brazil. And we don't have a complete picture. The Pandora's box has kind of been opened here. And there's an old line from Firesign Theater, the 1960s psychedelic group. And Firesign Theater made an album, and the title of it was Everything You Know Is Wrong. And that is pretty much the conclusion that I've reached, that everything we know about ancient history is wrong. And it's actually because we know that winners in wars write history. The winners write the history. It's like for years in our textbooks, they never mention Native Americans. It's just the whites came over here. There were some Indians that fought them. They helped them out at first, but they fought them, and the whites prevailed. And then we found all this weird stuff, and we kept pushing the Indians further and further. That was the history. But everything we knew was wrong. There was a very, very long and rich history that took place here. And it's very interesting. We just don't know. Everything we know is wrong. I really believe that is pretty darn close to the truth, at least with archaeology.
Yeah, I'll on the subject of Edgar Cayce, what I do is I do a comparative analysis of a variety of different sources in an effort to figure out what happened in the past and bypass the human ego. And not like, ooh, I came up with some grand theory, but I look at all the strange and specific things that all these sources are saying. That's Berosus, Herodotus, Plato, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, religious documents, and oral traditions from around the globe are all essentially telling the same story that, for the most part, a couple, like the Bible doesn't talk about Atlantis, but they talk about the flood, and they talk about giants, or it talks about giants. So anyways, Cayce's timeline is that 210,000 BC, Atlantis is founded in the middle of the Atlantic, essentially, by spirit beings who were ensnared in matter. That's basically how he portrayed it, whatever you want to make of that, like a supernatural founding of the species. And that there were a series of cataclysms in 50 and 28,000 BC, and the last destruction was about 13,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas impact. And as part of the population of Atlantis, there were little people and giants, and the first humans were androgynous, were sexless beings. Now, that sounds very odd, but then you have the flood occur, and all around the world after the flood, who shows up but androgynous beings rocking these strange man bags who teach the arts of civilization to everyone. Vieira in South America, Quetzalcoatl, both androgynous wisdom bringers, culture heroes. Fuxi Nuwa is androgynous in China. He taught the I Ching, or she taught the I Ching. Oannes, the fish god, was androgynous, who taught the arts and civilization of the Sumerians. The Dogon people in Mali, Africa, they have the Nomo, who are androgynous beings that show up. In Ireland, you have androgynous beings. It's utterly fascinating. that these androgynous creator gods show up all around the planet after this cataclysm. Survivors from Atlantis, maybe Cayce would say, that restart civilization. And you have androgynous iconography on some of the oldest statues on the planet, like Ayin Ghazal, Jericho, and even possibly at Göbekli Tepe. A statue, Göbekli Tepe is the 13,000-year-old temple site in Turkey that was found several years back. That's utterly astonishing. The oldest temple site on the planet, some would say the newest phase of civilization that got jump-started after the flood, has iconography that represents androgyny. And polydactylism is represented at Ayin Ghazal, 8200 BC in Jordan, and at the Jericho statues. The most ancient statues on the planet show polydactylism, 6 fingers and 6 toes, famously associated with giants in the Bible, Samuel 21:20, and the giant of Gath, and androgyny. So Edgar Cayce, this guy with an 8th grade education going into a trance-like state, is portraying this most fascinating story that is supported by all these other sources, by these secret societies who hold this information close to them and don't have erroneous stuff in their teachings, and by statues and iconography all around the planet. And to me, it is beyond fascinating. Like, if you were to hook somebody up, to a lie detector and make them watch like 10 hours of all this information, I would think they'd end up saying there is a story here, and it is beyond coincidence.
I should also point out that androgyny, but polydactylism was also observed in a number of giants uncovered in North America as well.
That's one of the traits associated with giants is polydactylism. And
you guys need to explain that. I bet 99% of the people that hear that have no idea what it means. Polydactylism.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's 6 fingers and 6 toes. Extra digits is polydactylism. Okay. And there is rock art, petroglyphs, art, and iconography all around the world, including Pacific isolated islands, with huge handprints and footprints with 6 fingers and 6 toes. It's utterly fascinating. It's everywhere. It's all of the Americas too, not just in the Southwest, in Utah and those states. So, and the natives have this legend of these people that showed up from a lost world with 6 fingers, 6 toes, and it's beyond coincidence. This isn't just unicorns and rainbows. This is like rock art and traditions and iconography. It's really quite a fascinating thing.
Mm-hmm. Greg, now you did a lot of your diving expeditions in the Caribbean based on some of the readings that Edgar Cayce gave. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's true. Really, we started it because I wanted to do something kind of exciting. And it truly was. We were at the point to where I could pretty much do anything I wanted to do, and we had the resources to go anywhere and do whatever we wanted to do. And it was quite accidental at that time. I'd already written about Cayce and the Mound Builders. That book had come out, and we had done some other work with the Cayce organization. And Laura and I started really as a favor to the organization at the time they needed some help. We started editing a newsletter on ancient mysteries. And in the course of doing this, I was involved with helping set up the annual Ancient Mysteries Conference in Virginia Beach, which generally has about 400 people that comes into it, and it's their premier conference every year. So I started helping set up who was going to come and speak and what the topic was going to be. And up to that time, it was all about Egypt. It was their annual Egypt conference. And so we had this newsletter called Ancient Mysteries, and I said, look, we're going to change the name of this to Ancient Mysteries, this Egypt conference. That way you can talk about anything. So basically they agreed, and one of the first people that I brought in was this guy from England named Andrew Collins. Andrew came. I had read a couple of books by Andrew, one of which I still think is probably the best book ever written in any alternative field, and it's called From the Ashes of Angels. But Andrew had written a book on Atlantis, And so I got him invited to the talk, and we immediately became friends. And in the middle of one of his talks, he showed a picture of an object in the Caribbean near Andros Island, which is the largest of the Bahama Islands. And it was widely touted since 1968, when it was first found, as a triple ring of standing stones. And that's what everybody said it was. And Edgar Cayce, who was alive then, even talked about it quite a bit. And he was excited about it when we told him we're going to go and find this thing. But we talked to archaeologists that said, we've tried to find it. We flew all over, couldn't find it. The first thing my wife and I did was go to Florida and talk to the pilot who actually took the photo of it.
What a concept, huh?
No one had ever, I mean, one group spent $30,000 doing an aerial survey up and down Andros Island, thinking they were going to find this formation. And I found this guy pretty easily. He lived in Miami. He was very happy for us to come and talk to him. And I said, everybody's tried to find this. And he said, well, I didn't know that. He said, nobody's ever asked me. And I said, do you know where it was? And he said, well, sure. And he said, just a minute. So he walks out and he has his pilot's map of that area. And I'm a private pilot, licensed private pilot. And he took that pilot's map and he laid it down and he said, it's right here. So my wife and I chartered a high wing, 2-engine, very slow, it's called a Norman Islander plane. One of the reasons that no one had flown down in that area in their surveys is because it's in Cuban airspace. It's in the Havana ADZ. Part of Andros Island, the southern part, is in Cuban airspace, and they had actually shot down American flyers down there in the early 70s. It was still very hostile. So this guy, the guy I got to charter the plane from, was excited, and he said, heck yeah, I'll do that. He said, we'll fly at 500 feet. We'll just fly under the radar. So we did. We flew down. We found a whole bunch of formations that were famous that no one had ever been able to find. We took the GPS from the air, and we found this triple ring of stones. It looked just like standing stones. So that's how we started in all this. Then my wife and I it was very difficult to find somebody to get us over there. We went to the other side. We got to that circle, and it clearly is a circle, and when you get up to it in low tide, they look like standing stones until you walk up to them, and they were all giant sponges. I know, it sounds bizarre, but I mean, that's the way these things are. It's like a 250-foot perfect white circle outlined with these black sponges, and it had several rings in some places. Then, while we were there, I found the explanation in a marine biology textbook that I had borrowed on the island, and I thought that was it. We had also looked at a thing called Ribicoff's E, an underwater formation, in all the old books about Atlantis, and we found it was an unusual coral reef is all it was. It's an E-shaped formation, like the cursive letter E underwater, but nobody had ever been able to find it, but we did. So I thought we were done, and then some guy came during a thunderstorm. He thought we were treasure hunters. When he found out we weren't, he told us about a formation that looked a lot like the Bimini Road, and that really got us started. It was pretty astonishing. It got a lot of attention from geologists who were very interested in it, and the ARE was really interested. That got us then to look at the Bimini Road to compare it. One of the things I'll say, we've uncovered so much nonsense that went on in the 60s and 70s, such as the U.S. Geological Survey had one of their employees, and they all knew about this, fabricate fake artifacts, including statues, take them to Bimini and plant them around the Bimini Road in the hopes that one of the Atlantis researchers from the Cayce organization would find them and publicize them, and then they were going to make fun of them and say, oh, it's a hoax. Now, that's it. Eugene Shin, who's now retired, did it. I have no fear whatsoever of being sued because he did it, and he's actually on film admitting it. And some of the people that thought it was very humorous when they knew about it are on the same film talking about it. So loads and loads of things like that. Archaeologists flat out lied in some of their reports about the Bimini Road. I don't think the Bimini Road was Atlantis. We never said it was, nor was the structure in Andros. There's an unknown maritime culture that was operating around 3,000 to 4,000 BC in the Bahamas. And there are at least 4 places where these identical breakwater formations are found. But again, they probably go to 3,000 to 4,000 BC. There may have been something well before then, but that's what we did. My wife and I spent 25 weeks on boats exploring. We bought our own boat, put side scan sonar on it, and really spent a lot of time. And it was fun. We found 31 crashed planes while we were there, including 3 that had crashed and disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle. So that's kind of a summary of all of it.
Well, I mean, just the idea, though, that there was a maritime culture operating in that area, and I take it that 3,000 years ago the water levels were lower than they are now.
It was lower. We're actually talking 3,000 BC. We're talking about 5,000 years.
5,000, okay.
And the water level then was about 45 feet lower in 5,000 years ago. It was about 45 feet lower or so than it is today. We found the remains of a temple 30 miles south of Bimini, which the Bahamas government knows about. The guy who is over Microsoft's archaeology funding program contacted us and sent someone down to look at it to see if they could restore it. This is all true. But we have been told we're not allowed to show anybody where it is. We follow the Bahamians' laws and we follow their instructions. And so my wife talks about it and we show film of it sometimes in pictures. But it's a real temple. It's a collapsed temple 30 miles south of Bimini by an island, and it was a high spot at one time. So there's lots of stuff there. But archaeologists won't go. Even the archaeologists that look at it say, yeah, you're right, but I can't go. I can't be associated with this.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to have to, we're drawing, unfortunately, to a close of our program, so I want to give you both the opportunity to let our listeners know where they can find out more about you online. So, Dr. Little, let's go with you first.
Well, I'm on Facebook, Gregory L. Little, and apmagazine.info, That's where I still will write an article about once a month or so. That's it. Professionally, I have lots of other websites, but unless you're a criminal, you're probably not interested in those.
and the title of your new book coming out in September?
That's called Denisovan Origins. Origins.
All right, I look forward to that. And okay, so Jim, what about you?
Megalithomania.uk is a huge site, but I'm associated with you, and I'm on Facebook if anybody wants to say hi. I have a Giants on Record page on Facebook for my book.
And what's the title of your book, and where can people find it?
Giants on Record, Amazon.com.
And what about any new programs for the History Channel or any of the others in the works?
Yeah, I was just on Megan Fox's show. I am doing a another show on travel, an adventure show episode about giants. I'm filming the next month or two, and yeah, we'll see. I was talking to networks and producers and stuff, and I like to make some appearances. I don't know if I'm going to do my own show. It's such a pain in the ass, but well, I'm sure I'll keep appearing on TV like an idiot.
Jim is an incredible researcher. He's on Facebook also. I can say that. You can find his books on Amazon. And it is the most comprehensive of all the books about the giants in the Americas. His co-author, Hugh Newman, runs Megalithomania, and megalithomania.com is a website that also has a lot of Jim's information on it. And he's a great guy. He was treated very, very poorly when he did that everyday posting on Facebook. In fact, that is how I found out about Jim Vieira. And I just was, I thought it was amazing when he did that. Every day he'd post a different one. And I was thinking, is this ever going to end? When's he going to run out? And he never did. He was finally criticized so much by archaeologists. I mean, they were vicious attacks on him. But he's talking about androgyny, and maybe that's why he's still here on Valentine's night. If he's there, he'll say something.
Well, and so his programs on the History Channel was Search for the Lost Giants, and then Roanoke, Search for the Lost Colony, and Return to Roanoke. So I'm going to have to sign us off here. So Dr. Little, Jim, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre. We learned a lot, and Tim Beckley, if you're out there listening, get better, and hope you can join us again next week on Exploring the Bizarre.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.